The Secret Story of Hin. Chapter 15. This ain't no benediction. The night Cedar Grove Plantation crumbled into blood and chaos. The Louisiana swamp became a choked confessional, bearing witness to a terror it had never known. They felt him before they saw him, a shift in the air, thick and cloying as drave dirt. The cicadas fell silent, and the frogs ceased their chorus. Overseer Thaddeus Monroe, a man whose bulk quivered with drink and fear, tasted bile rising in his throat. He'd heard the whispers from neighboring farms, the whispers of impossible speed, of men vanishing between heartbeats, of a dark presence that bullets merely annoyed. He'd doubled the patrols, positioning his men, shivering farm hands armed with old muskets, and bravado thin as onion skin. Near the slave quarters, by the cane fields, the shadowed approach from the swamp. Anything moves, you unload, Monroe spat, his voice tight with a fear he wouldn't name. Don't think, just shoot, shoot till it stops twitching. Gunfire erupted, a frantic, ragged volley tearing through the humid night. Muzzle flashes painted brief, hellish tableaus against the darkness. Leads slammed into leaves, ripped through bark, whined past unseen targets. Then a solid thump, thump, thump. Hin stood and touched, the dark shape advancing steadily. Ida's coat, that miracle of woven strength and stolen metal plates, absorbed the slugs. Each impact felt like a blacksmith's hammer blow against an anvil, jarring but not breaking. Death, reduced to a violent shove. Sweet Jesus, he ain't going down. A young overseer, barely shaving age, shrieked as he fumbled to reload, dropping the gunpowder in his panic. Beside him, Emmanuel Briggs, a brute whose pleasure was measured in the welts he raised, cursed, emptied his pepperbox revolver at the advancing silhouette. 6 shots spat fire, 6 slugs flattened against the coat. When the smoke cleared, him hadn't slowed. Briggs stared, his face bleached white in the torchlight, dropped his useless weapon, and clawed at the crucifix around his thick neck, babbling prayers his sins wouldn't allow to pass his lip. What is it? A man? No man took bullets like that. Then what the hell is it? A demon spat from the swamp's gut, a monster sculpted from vengeance. It's the Bigfoot, the skunk ape, yelled Jasper Hill. He was the youngest of Monroe's crew, already stained with the blood of runaways he'd helped track down earlier that day. His voice cracked like dry kindling. He's come for our souls. Hin didn't offer the luxury of hesitation. He flowed between the frantic shots like smoke twisting through reeds, closing the distance with predatory grace. The long rusty knife, honed sharp enough to shave fear itself, cut the torchlight once, a sliver of deadly promise, before it buried itself deep in Jasper's throat. The boy was older than him, but still just a boy. In truth, they both were just boys. His terrified cry choked on blood, his eyes wide with the ultimate surprise. The fight was brutal, swift, and utterly one-sided. Him beat that boy the way Master Samuel used to beat Mama Kalisa, with no mercy, no pause, just pain. Then he leaned in, blood still dripping, and whispered, "Good morning, boy." 14 men died before their minds could fully register the attack. Some fell with throats opened ear to ear, arterial spray painting the humid air crimson before their bodies even understood they were dead. One man, Curtis Mayhew, who fancied himself quick with a whip handle, swung wildly, only to have his arm snapped at the elbow before him drove the splintered bone shard up under his jaw. They died with expressions of disbelief, slack-jawed terror, rifles still gripped tight in hands already stiffening. Their last thoughts prayers swallowed by the indifferent night. Then came the women, not just wives, but active participants in the plantation's machinery of cruelty. Sarah Monroe, the overseer's wife, who meticulously paired enslaved men and women like breeding stock, her ledgers filled with cold calculations of human potential. Clara Jenkins, who held down terrified girls, whispering assurances while her husband broke them in. Georgina Thatcher, whose thin lips curled in satisfaction as she denied medicine, preaching the gospel of suffering as character building. They met the same swift, unblinking judgment. They bled out on the fine rugs of the main house or in the dirt just outside it. Beside them were their enslaver husbands, their sons, and their daughters, with final moments filled with the same terror they had inflicted daily, begging for a mercy they'd never conceived of offering. He kneeled, his voice sharp and furious. You claim mercy from your crucified Savior while our blood waters your fields, your gospel of salvation preached through our chains and scars. You dare speak mercy from a God nailed to a wooden pole. That same God watched while our children were auctioned off like cattle, while our women were torn open and our men chained like dogs. Your prayers are piss on the graves of the stolen. This ain't no benediction. It's a reckoning, a blood ledger read aloud to the ancestors, to the ghosts strung from trees like strange fruit, bones broken beneath the lash, names erased by fire and rope. Your God was silent, ours remembers. Your salvation bought with our skin, your glory from God, is our pain and suffering. So, ye gave them the same mercy they gave us. None. When it was over, their bodies lay in the dirt, their blood soaking into the earth that had once swallowed the tears of the enslaved. The night air grew thick with the metallic scent of open flesh mingling with the perfume of magnolias that bordered the main house. Nature's beauty and man's brutality, side by side as always. Then he moved to the cabins. The chains fell first, broken with the butt of a stolen rifle. Metal that had been forged to last generations snapped like kindling under his hands. Each break was a promise fulfilled, each shattered link a step toward something that had seemed impossible just hours before. The doors flung open. 40 souls, faces gaunt with hunger, eyes dull with too many years of suffering, blinked at him in disbelief. Solomon Jenkins, a man whose back bore more scars than unmarked skin, was the first to stand. His legs trembled not from fear, but from a hope so sudden and painful it threatened to break him. Is you, the Solomon began, but couldn't finish. Words failed him as tears carved paths through the dust on his face. Move was all him said, and they followed, stumbling at first, then running, feet pounding against the dirt, toward the woods, toward the trail Ida had taught him to carve into the wild. Old Miss Scatter, who'd lost 3 children to sale and 1 to the overseer's rage, ran with strength her 70 years shouldn't have allowed. 6-year-old Jeremiah, who'd never known a day without fear, moved with the grace of someone reborn. The night howled behind them, shouts of panic, the crackling of fire catching on dry wood, the screams of the dying. Someone, it might have been the plantation owner himself, Henry Augustine Taylor, fired wildly from an upstairs window, his shots scattering harmlessly as terror turned his hands to useless claws. But him did not look back. He led them forward, deeper into the trees, into the sanctuary of the dark, where no chains could reach. The forest floor was treacherous, roots waited to trip feet and used to running branches clawed at faces and arms, but fear of what lay behind pushed them onward. The path to Mexico, to Camarón, was a distant, treacherous dream. But freedom wasn't a dream tonight. It was here. It was real. And if anyone thought they could take it again, they have to get it back in blood. They tried, but it was nothing more than a sacrifice paid for in full with their souls. As they began their journey back to Camarón, Mexico, where Patwa, Ida, and the liberated Jones people awaited, him and the newly freed group of 40 made their way through the dense oppressive air. The swamp closed around them like a living thing, dark water reflecting fragments of stars when the canopy broke. Mosquitoes feasted on exposed flesh, and somewhere in the distance, the low growl of an alligator reminded them this sanctuary had its own dangers. Their voices were filled with hope and desperation as they pleaded with him, urging him to free their children, wives, husbands, and friends from the cruel Cedar Haven plantation. Esther Williams, whose husband had been sold away 2 seasons ago, clutched at his sleeve, her fingers trembling as she described where they might be keeping her daughters. "They just babies," she whispered, her voice breaking. 11 and 9. "Master said they'd fetch good prices when they ripened, but they ain't ripe. They just babies. Rebecca Turner, whose face bore a web of scars from the time she'd tried to protect her son from a whipping, added her voice to the chorus. My boy Jacob, he got a birthmark shaped like Africa on his shoulder blade. You'll know him by that, please, mister, please. Their words fell upon him like stones, each story heavier than the last, each plea another weight added to the burden he already carried. It was a place where bloodlines were butchered, where mothers were ripped screaming from their children's arms, where fathers were dragged off in chains and auctioned like cattle, souls broken, names erased, lives scattered like ash in the wind. Cedar Haven wasn't just a plantation. It was a factory of despair where human beings were processed, broken, and remade into property. Cedar Haven and Cedar Grove plantations weren't just neighbors. They were bound by blood and brutality. Owned by the Taylor brothers, Henry Augustine and William Henry, they traded human beings the way other men traded horses. When the cotton harvest strained their labor force, they shuffled souls back and forth without a second thought, as if moving chess pieces on a board, each one expendable, replaceable, forgettable. Children disappeared overnight. A kitchen girl named Eliza was sent to Cedar Grove after her mother's death, her wrist still bruised from the stocks where she'd been held for dropping a silver serving tray. The marks from the rope had barely faded before she was loaded onto a cart and taken away, her threadbare bundle of possessions forgotten in the corner of the cabin she'd shared with 5 others. Joseph, a strong-backed field hand, was swapped like coin for 2 adolescent girls and never seen again. They whispered his name like a ghost around the cooking fires, telling stories of his strength, of how he'd once lifted a wagon off a child who'd fallen beneath its wheel. Hannah, his wife, still left a portion of her meager rations by the door of their cabin, believing he might someday return, hungry and in need of welcome. The overseers were devils in linen, big-jawed men like Reuben Smalls and Curtis Bale strutted with whips coiled at their hips, eyes always scanning for an excuse to strike. Reuben took particular pleasure in finding fault with the women, his punishments often administered in private, the victims returning with vacant eyes and torn clothing. Curtis preferred public displays, gathering everyone to witness what happened to those who forgot their place. Patrolmen from nearby counties came through like hounds on a hunt, stopping through slave quarters, dragging out men they suspected of planning flight. Their leader, Sheriff Ezekiel Whitmore, wore a necklace of dried ears, trophies taken from runaways he'd caught and killed. They beat a boy named Obadiah so bad he forgot his own name for 2 days, his mind retreating from the trauma of what they'd done to him. When he came back to himself, he wouldn't speak above a whisper for months. The enslaved were weary but not dead. They wore their pain in silence, trading glances that spoke volumes when words would have gotten them killed. They sang low in the fields, coded hymns about Jordan and freedom, about storms coming and chains breaking. Granny Robin Marie, who'd survived 3 generations of enslavement, kept the old ways alive, teaching children to find north by the stars, to identify which plants could heal and which could kill. Old Thomas, the blacksmith whose hands bore burns from decades at the forge, secretly weakened the chains he was forced to make, leaving imperfections no white eye would detect. The weight of their unspoken plea pressed into the marrow of him's bones. Even without a word, he knew what they were asking. Their eyes held centuries of suffering, of waiting, of hope deferred until it hardened into something almost unrecognizable. But it was still there, buried beneath layers of survival. The desperate human need to be free. Reluctantly, he left them, hidden deep in the belly of the swamp, beyond where the dogs could sniff and the lanterns could shine. Safe for now. But freedom was never free, and the path to it was paved with blood. His or theirs, either way, the toll would be paid. Alone, Him set his course toward Cedar Haven, the cries of the broken trailing behind him like ghosts. The night enfolded in shadows, melting into his silhouette until he was nothing more than movement and intent. The coat Ida had made him, that miracle of woven cloth and stolen metal, hung heavy on his shoulders, a reminder of what waited for him And what he'd survived to reach this point. He had learned patience in the fire. Torture had taught him silence. Hunger had taught him control. Every night spent shackled became a lesson on how to move without being seen. Every scar a map of what he would never allow to happen again. His body, once broken beneath the lash, had rebuilt itself into a weapon no overseer could match. Cedar Haven was a fortress of suffering, its walls lined with white men gripping rifles, dogs foaming at the mouth with anticipation, and guards moving in cruel precision. After the fall of Cedar Grove, they doubled their vigilance, expecting retribution. They rotated shifts like soldiers, never breaking rhythm, except when arrogance lulled them. That was what him waited for. From his vantage point in the dense undergrowth, he studied Overseer Floyd Burnham, a man with a reputation for drinking on duty. Like clockwork, Floyd would disappear behind the smokehouse at midnight, emerging 20 minutes later with glassy eyes and an unsteady gait. That 20-minute window was when the southeast corner of the property stood vulnerable. Inside, the enslaved moved like shadows, heads down, backs bent, dreams buried beneath years of abuse. A woman named Auntie May had gone mute after her third child was sold. She communicated only through her hands now, nimble fingers weaving baskets so intricate they sold for top dollar in Charleston markets. The master took the profit. May took the small, bitter comfort of knowing her children might see her work someday and remember her. A boy named Kessie, no older than 9, had already learned how to hide pain behind a grin. He served in the big house, fetching and carrying for the master's children, absorbing their casual cruelty with a smile that never reached his eyes. At night, he carved tiny wooden figures of warriors, hiding them beneath the floorboards of the cabin he shared with 18 others. It wasn't a plantation. It was a machine of despair, the kind of place that broke hope before it could bloom, that ground souls into dust to fertilize white ambition. The air itself felt heavy with suffering, the ground saturated with tears and blood no rain could wash away. He knew better than to rush in. He needed precision, disruption, silence, then fire. The whispers from Cedar Grove had already reached here, tales of a ghost, a demon, a vengeful spirit cutting down white men like wheat. Fear made them dangerous. It also made them sloppy. So he watched. 3 days, no food, buried breathing. His body melted into the trees, his eyes memorizing every patrol path, every break in the routine. Reuben Smalls had a limp and always scratched his neck before turning east. One of the hounds, Jasper, feared thunder and always ran to the barn at the first rumble. The main house had a blind spot, a section where the windows didn't quite align, creating a pocket of darkness the lanterns couldn't reach. Details, that's where the war would be won. By the 4th night, the sky cracked open. The storm didn't creep in, it charged. Lightning split the heavens and rain slammed down like judgment, turning the manicured grounds into a treacherous mire. The air tasted of electricity and promise. Perfect. Overseers shouted over the wind, torches flickering, boots slipping in the mud. The dogs whined, spooked by the storm. Guards pulled cloaks tighter, focused on the sky instead of the shadows. That was their mistake. He moved, fluid, silent, fatal. He was the rain, the wind, the vengeance. No prayer could stop. The overseers were no different than those who once whipped his mother while he washed. He showed them no mercy, no hesitation, only justice. The first one went down without a sound, his throat sliced so clean, so precise. The blood stayed trapped inside him for a heartbeat before reality caught up. He moved like shadow incarnate, gliding through the swamp's gloom with a blade that knew only truth. The second guard didn't even get to scream. Steel found his ribs, twisted hard, and he folded to the earth like rotted wood. The third tried to fight, fired a shot. It hit him square, but the coat Ida made drank the bullet whole. Before the man could blink again, him wrenched the rifle from his grip and caved in his skull with one brutal crack. The sound echoed through the mossy stillness like a church bell at a funeral. He didn't look back, didn't mourn, didn't pause. Only death behind him, only freedom ahead. He moved toward the cabins, where the broken waited, chained to rot, breathing only because hope refused to die. The first door exploded under his boot. Inside, shadows shrank back in fear. But one didn't. She stood there, small and scarred, her eyes wide with disbelief. That's when I found my faith, not the kind you sing about in hymns. Not the Sunday morning hope carved into pulpits by men who never bled for what they preached. No, this faith was different. She was made of flesh and fight. Her name was Thay. Her beauty hit like a wound, sharp, aching, unforgettable. Petite, maybe 5'4", but every inch of her carried the weight of battle survived. Skin like river stone kissed by sun, cheekbones sculpted by sorrow. A quiet gap between her front teeth that made her smile feel like a memory fighting to be remembered. She didn't smile, though, not then. She stared at him like he wasn't real, like freedom was just another trick. Have you seen them? She whispered, voice trembling like an old wound cracked open. My boys, Cranston, he 10 now. Kevingston just turned 8. And my husband Daniel, he said he was coming. Said the storm was coming. I just need to know if they made it. She wasn't begging. She was bleeding. Her voice carried no weakness, only the weight of love and loss. Hume didn't answer. Words were useless here. He raised his rifle and shattered the lock. The chains hit the floor like a curse being broken. She didn't move at first, just stared. Then, slowly, as if afraid the moment might vanish, she stepped into the night barefoot and stunned, a ghost crossing back into the land of the living. Kim was already kicking down the next door. Cabin after cabin, lock after lock, the nightmare cracked open and poured out. Men and women blinked into the dark, too gaunt to believe, too starved to trust what they were seeing. 44 in total, 44 souls snatched from the edge. 8 too sick to move were left behind, their eyes hollow with apologies. But him said nothing, just nodded once. The living had to move. They ran into the swamp like shadows reborn, now 84 strong. 30 men, 24 women, 30 children, from to plantations, to nightmares, one growing rebellion. They didn't speak, they didn't cry. They moved like ghosts behind him, silent, desperate, alive. Behind them, chaos bloomed. Screams split the trees, gunfire echoed. The swamp trembled with the rage of the South waking up to its reckoning. But him didn't look back. He was already gone, already calculating the next escape, the next raid, the next strike. Already becoming a myth. By the time they reached the Jones people, dawn was breaking bleeding orange and crimson across the sky like war paint. The firelight revealed what they had become. A wave of silence crashed through the camp as him emerged from the shadows, coat soaked in sweat and smoke, face set like carved stone. Behind him came the rescued, trembling, hollow-eyed, clinging to the impossible. Ida stood frozen, lips parted, her sharp mind already counting, already planning. Pat was grin cracked wide. But this time, it wasn't mischief. It was reverence. Him had returned not as a man but as something more. A storm with a heartbeat, a curse with a conscience. There were no words for what they saw, and him didn't wait for any. He walked through the camp like a ghost through memory, unreachable, unshaken, until a voice cut through the hush like a cry from the edge of heaven. Mama. They turned. 2 boys barreled through the crowd. Cranston, Kevingston, both filthy, breathless, eyes wide with disbelief. And then they were in her arms, screaming, sobbing, clutching her like the world was trying to rip them away again. Faith dropped to her knees and howled, not with fear, but with something deeper, something holy. The sound tore through the camp like thunder, shaking the roots, shaking the sky. We had found her boys months ago now, and at last, they were together again. At that moment, somewhere in the dark, him allowed himself one breath, just one.
You've been listening to The Secret, story of him, from enslaved to the grave. The man who freed more slaves than Harriet Tubman. Chapter 15, This Ain't No Benediction. Thank you for surviving this chapter with us. where the hands that once begged for mercy now shape weapons, and where the silence of the dead has turned into a war cry too loud for heaven to ignore. This ain't a blessing. This ain't forgiveness. This is what comes after the prayers are ignored and the graves are still warm. This is sacred rage dressed in flesh and ash, dragging history into the light, screaming, "We ain't done yet!" If this chapter hit you somewhere deep, somewhere the world taught you to keep quiet, honor that. Like, subscribe, turn on your notifications, and speak in the comments. Speak for those who never got to. Chapter 16 is coming. Tap the link. Follow him deeper into the belly of the beast, where salvation don't wear white robes, and justice don't whisper. Support the mission. Cash App, my U-Time. This ain't just a story. It's the ghost of 1,000 chains snapping. It's the undone prayer, the unfinished funeral, the dirt still wet, the reckoning still rising. This ain't no benediction, it's a warning, and the storm is just beginning.